All right, welcome to another deep dive with yours truly.
And me.
Today, we are tackling a really dark and complex period,
Oh, yeah.
the Red Terror in Soviet Russia.
Yeah. The systematic campaign of political repression and executions carried out by the Bolsheviks, mainly through the Cheka.
Right, the Cheka, the secret police.
Yeah.
So this campaign officially was from early September 1918 to 1922. Officially,
All
yes.
right.
However, it's really important to understand that there was a lot of significant violence coming from Bolshevik factions.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Before this, even going back into late 1917.
Mm,
And of course, this is all happening during the Russian Civil War, which was brutal.
absolutely.
So for this deep dive, you've brought a range of articles to the table and maybe some of your own insights into this period,
Yeah.
which is quite violent.
It is.
And our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge
Yes.
and understanding about this.
Absolutely.
To offer a shortcut, if you will, through...
Yeah. Through this dense and disturbing history.
Absolutely. So let's unpack this. Where did this impulse for such widespread terror really take hold?
Well, it's fascinating. Right after the Bolsheviks seized power in November 1917, they actually seemed reluctant to engage in, really widespread violence.
Really?
Yeah, one of their very first things they did was abolish the death penalty.
Huh. That's quite a stark contrast to what was to come.
It really is. So what shifted? Well, there's several factors at play.
Okay.
So first of all, the Bolsheviks are under increasing military pressure from the White Armies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the intervention of international forces.
Right.
And on top of this external threat, there were also some pretty brutal events within Russia itself,
Yeah.
that kind of, I guess you could say, radicalized their approach.
Like what?
Well, one example that's often cited is the what they call the massacre of Red prisoners in Moscow.
Right.
This was during the October fighting,
Right.
like in 1917.
And then you also have the ruthless suppression of revolutionaries during the Finnish Civil War.
Ah, yes.
So these weren't just isolated incidents,
Right.
This really demonstrates the rapid breakdown of order,
Right.
and it really kind of shows this culture of violence emerging
Yeah.
that would become really, a characteristic of the whole Red Terror.
Yeah, a bit of a taste of things to come.
Absolutely.
So these early experiences, I'm gathering, created a sense of siege.
Hmm.
And maybe, in their minds at least, justified these increasingly extreme measures.
I think so, yeah.
Were there any specific events that directly triggered the formal launch in September of 18?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There were a few catalysts.
Okay.
So you had the assassination attempt on Lenin.
Right.
Now, obviously, he survived,
He did.
but that was a major factor.
I bet.
And then along with that, you have the successful assassinations of Moisey Uritsky.
Okay.
He was the head of the Petrograd Cheka.
Right.
And then V. Volodarsky, he was a prominent Bolshevik party editor.
And so these acts really created this climate of fear and this demand for retribution within the Bolshevik leadership.
Right, they needed to strike back.
Yeah.
Were they looking at any historical examples while they were coming up with a response?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The Reign of Terror during the French Revolution,
Okay.
that was a pertinent model for them.
How so?
Well, because it set a precedent, right?
Hmm.
Using extreme violence to consolidate revolutionary power
Yeah.
and eliminate the enemies of the state or perceived enemies of the state.
How did the Bolsheviks publicly justify this dramatic shift towards terror?
Well, Trotsky argued
Okay.
that the Red Terror was a necessary response to the White Terror,
Ah, okay.
which, important to note, had begun earlier in 1917.
All right.
So they're saying, well, look, we're just responding to the violence that's already being done to us.
They're framing it as self-defense.
Exactly.
So even before the official declaration in September 1918,
Mhm.
was there already significant violence going on from the Bolsheviks?
Yeah, there was a lot of violence, but it was kind of unsanctioned
Yeah.
and decentralized in those initial stages.
Mm-hmm.
It was mostly coming from these groups like, the sailors, the soldiers, local Red Guards.
Right.
They engaged in all sorts of violence, confiscating property, imposing fines, summary executions, hostage taking.
You mentioned some specific instances of this early violence.
Yeah, so you had in Yevpatoria, in January 1918, there were reportedly about 300 people murdered
Wow.
by sailors of the Black Sea Fleet.
Hmm.
And this included officers, intellectuals, ordinary citizens.
Now, how were they murdered?
Well, there were accounts of them breaking their limbs and throwing them into the sea from a steamship.
Oh, my goodness.
The steamship was called the Romania,
Right.
And then in Odessa, they had similar atrocities, like with officers and cadets being thrown from a cruiser, the Almaz.
Right.
And then there's this one particularly gruesome account of a colonel being roasted alive in the firebox of a locomotive engine.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, so these weren't just isolated incidents of brutality. This really demonstrates, like I was saying, that breakdown of order and the emergence of this culture of extreme violence.
Yeah, so it sounds like these weren't just executions. These were very clearly designed to be...
They were meant to send a message.
Brutal and send a message.
Absolutely.
It was meant to be...
sadistic.
Sadistic, yeah.
Yeah.
So was it just contained to those port cities?
Well, no, in Taganrog.
Okay.
After the Bolsheviks took over, they had about 50 officer cadets who had surrendered.
Okay.
And they were thrown into a blast furnace at a metal factory.
Oh, good Lord.
So these are just, these are all examples of what was going on.
Right.
This chaotic and extremely violent early phase.
Yeah.
And it really highlights that descent into brutality.
It does.
Even before they made the official declaration of the Red Terror.
Yeah, it's almost like they were getting their feet wet. So was Lenin himself advocating for more severe measures?
He was.
As early as this period before September?
Yes, as early as August 20th, 1918.
Okay.
He issued a directive urging the energetic suppression.
What does that even mean?
Well, of what he called kulaks, who were basically just wealthier peasants who often resisted the Bolshevik policies, especially, when they would requisition grain.
Right.
And then also white guards.
Yeah.
His instructions were basically to confiscate their grain and property.
Okay.
Publicly hang at least 100 kulak ringleaders.
Wow.
Arm the poor.
Okay.
And significantly arrest hostages from among the wealthy.
The hostages.
Yeah.
That seemed to be something that they...
Oh, yeah, they loved hostages.
Really stuck with.
Yeah.
It's a consistent and disturbing tactic.
Absolutely.
And even some pretty prominent figures fell victim to this early violence.
For example, General Nikolai Dukhonin.
Okay.
He was the commander-in-chief of the Russian army after the October Revolution.
Right. He was actually lynched by Bolshevik sailors in... late 1917.
Oh, wow.
Despite the fact that there was a Bolshevik official who was trying to protect him after he surrendered.
Oh, wow.
So even then, you've got this chaos, where people are just being murdered by...
Mob rule.
Yeah, basically.
Well, so you have this localized, unsanctioned violence alongside, increasingly harsh rhetoric coming from the leadership.
Yeah.
How did this then transition into the formal declaration of the Red Terror?
Well, a crucial step was the appointment of Felix Dzerzhinsky as the head of the Cheka.
The Cheka.
The All-Russian Extraordinary Commission. That was in December 1917.
Okay.
Dzerzhinsky, his mandate was to crush any counter-revolutionary threats to this new Soviet government. And the Cheka, they quickly became this instrument of Bolshevik repression, operating outside any traditional legal framework.
So when was the death penalty officially reinstated? Well, officially it was brought back February 21st, 1918.
Okay.
Through this decree, socialist homeland is in danger.
Catchy.
Yeah, very catchy.
Ominous and catchy.
And it stated that, enemy agents, profiteers, marauders, hooligans, counter-revolutionary agitators, and German spies are to be shot on the spot.
So that's a pretty broad definition, right?
Yeah, very broad, very chilling.
Yeah.
Gave them the power to just kill people.
Yeah, extrajudicial killing.
Yeah, pretty much.
For a wide range of things.
Exactly, yeah.
So it wasn't just those who were traditionally seen as enemies of the revolution.
That's right.
Who became targets.
Yeah, around April 1918,
right.
The Bolsheviks started suppressing anarchists.
The anarchists.
Yeah, who had initially been kind of their, how do you say?
Fellow travelers.
Yeah, fellow travelers, exactly, yeah.
What was the reason for that?
Well, even though they were initially allied against the provisional government, they had some fundamental ideological differences and power struggles,
The anarchists criticized the Bolsheviks' increasing control, the centralized control of power. Right.
Okay, so the anarchists, they were not for this one.
No.
Very strong.
No, they didn't like that.
Centralized.
No, they didn't like the Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissars as the sole governing body. They didn't like the fact that they were nationalizing land and industry.
Right.
And of course, they didn't like the Cheka.
Right, of course not.
No, and so some of the anarchist groups even advocated armed resistance.
Against the Bolshevik.
Yeah, against what they saw as this new form of authoritarianism.
Okay.
And the Bolsheviks increasingly viewed the anarchists as a threat.
Really?
Yeah, because they were decentralized and, they thought they were disorganized.
Yeah.
And then there were some violent crimes that were attributed to self-proclaimed anarchists. So
yeah, there's always a few bad apples.
Right, exactly.
That ruin it for everyone. Yeah, so the Bolsheviks saw them as a threat to their consolidation of power.
Okay, so the Bolsheviks, they cracked down on the anarchists.
They did.
How did this manifest?
Well, the Cheka, they launched a bunch of raids on anarchist centers in major cities.
Okay.
One big one was April 12th, 1918 in Moscow.
Okay.
Where they went after 26 anarchist centers.
Wow.
Including the headquarters of the Moscow Federation of Anarchist Groups.
And where was this?
This was at the House of Anarchy.
The House of Anarchy.
Yeah.
That's kind of ironic.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of the anarchists surrendered, but some of them resisted.
Oh, yeah.
So there were some casualties.
On both sides.
Yeah, both sides.
Yeah.
And hundreds of arrests.
Wow, so this was really
It was a turning point.
a turning point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at this point they were allies.
Mm-hmm.
And then very clearly
Yeah, this was the end of that alliance.
not allies.
That's right.
Do we have any accounts of this suppression from people who were there?
We do. Alexander Berkman and Emma Goldman.
Okay, I know those names.
Yeah, prominent American anarchists. They were in Russia at this time.
Okay.
And they later described these Cheka raids in their writings.
When was that?
In 1922.
Okay.
And they described this Moscow raid as the beginning of a ruthless and systematic persecution.
Of the anarchists.
Of anarchists, yeah, across Russia. And they pointed out that, while there had been some earlier, more sporadic repression, this particular event really signaled a clear policy shift.
Yeah, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Nope.
It seems like the Bolsheviks were systematically consolidating their authority by eliminating any political opposition, even those that initially supported the revolution.
That's right.
So the death penalty was officially reinstated in June, right?
Yeah, June 16, 1918, as a standard legal measure for counter-revolutionary offenses.
Okay.
So they're normalizing this, right?
Yeah.
The use of the death penalty.
And that was even before September.
That's right, yeah.
So by late summer 1918, the stage was set.
Yeah.
For the Red Terror. We need to talk about Lenin's pronouncements during this period.
Yeah.
Leading up to September.
Yeah. So you've got that infamous Lenin's hanging order telegram.
Right.
That was regarding a peasant revolt in Penza.
Okay.
And he demanded the public hanging of at least 100.
100, wow.
Notorious kulaks, rich men, bloodsuckers.
Wow, that's some pretty severe language.
It is.
Very harsh.
Yeah, and, he wanted them to seize their grain, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
So this is a really stark illustration
It is.
of his mindset and the extreme rhetoric.
Yes, so was that order carried out?
Well, that's the interesting thing.
Okay.
It seems like it wasn't fully carried out as written.
Really?
Yeah, and, historians like Vladimir Loganov have pointed out that Lenin, he often used very forceful language in his directives.
I can imagine.
And it's possible he did this as a way to kind of,
compensate.
Yeah, compensate for what he perceived as this lack of efficiency or revolutionary zeal within the Soviet bureaucracy.
So he knew that they weren't going to fully carry out these orders.
Well, yeah, there's evidence that he often complained about the slow or incomplete implementation of his orders.
So it's almost like he was trying to...
Yeah, he was trying to push them...
Scare them.
To be more extreme.
Into it.
Yeah.
So this highlights the complexities of these top-level directives and the action on the ground.
Right.
Even within an authoritarian regime.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's this gap between the leadership's intention and the actual implementation.
That's right.
By local authority.
Yeah, and despite the fact that, we're not sure to what degree these orders were followed, Lenin always justified the use of these harsh measures.
Right.
He pointed to all the uprisings, right? He's like, look, we're under threat. We have the White Terror. And he famously said, there can be no middle ground in this life and death struggle. Either the kulaks will massacre vast numbers of workers, or the workers will ruthlessly suppress the revolt.
Okay, so it's
very black and white.
Yeah, he's painting it very...
Yeah, very much so.
Black and white.
You're either with us or against us.
Yeah.
And if you're against us, we're going to kill you.
So this us versus them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Framing.
That was really key to his justification of the Red Terror.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we reach August 1918 with the assassinations and the attempt on Lenin's life.
Yes, That's right.
These are really the direct triggers.
The immediate impetus, yeah.
For the formal Red Terror.
Yeah. So you have the assassination of Uritsky. He was a powerful figure in the Petrograd Cheka
Right.
on August 17th.
Hmm.
And then Fanny Kaplan shooting Lenin
Right.
on August 30th.
Yeah.
And, during her interrogation, she said she acted alone.
What?
She saw Lenin as a traitor to the revolution. And she supported the Constituent Assembly, which had been dissolved.
Right.
So the Bolsheviks saw this as an attack on their leadership and the revolution itself.
Right.
And they responded immediately
Yeah.
and brutally.
Yeah, so Lenin's recovering from his wounds.
Mm-hmm.
What does he do?
He tells his comrades to secretly and urgently to prepare the terror.
Wow, so he's not letting a little thing like a gunshot wound.
He's not messing around.
Stop him.
No.
So immediately after these assassination attempts, what happens?
The Cheka in Petrograd and Kronstadt,
Mm-hmm.
they round up and execute something like 1,300 people.
1,300 people.
Yes, who they identify as bourgeois hostages.
And who are these hostages?
Well, these are people from the privileged social classes.
Right.
And basically, they're being held responsible for the actions of their opponents.
So it's a collective punishment.
Basically, yeah.
And the Bolshevik press
Oh, yeah.
really fueled this, didn't it?
Absolutely. Newspapers like Pravda and Krasnaya Gazeta.
Right. They played a huge role in, stirring up public anger and justifying this violence.
Mm-hmm.
And they used very, very inflammatory language.
Okay.
For example, an article in Krasnaya Gazeta declared that only rivers of blood can atone for the blood of Lenin and Uritsky.
Wow, that's...
So they're calling for...
That's intense.
Yeah, they're calling for mass bloodshed.
Wow, so by the time the Red Terror was officially announced, it sounds like the atmosphere was already thick with fear.
Oh, yeah. It was a scary time.
Yeah.
And vengeance,
Yeah, fueled by the state.
Absolutely.
So then when was the Red Terror officially announced?
Well, the first official announcement came on September 3rd, 1918.
Okay.
In Izvestia, which was the official gazette of the Soviet government.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in an article called Appeal to the Working Class.
Okay.
And this article was drafted by mainly by Dzerzhinsky and Jacobs Peters.
Who's Peters?
He was another prominent Chekist.
And they declared that the enemies of the revolution would be crushed.
Crushed, okay.
With massive terror.
Okay.
And they threatened immediate arrest and imprisonment for anyone spreading rumors against the Soviet regime.
Wow, spreading rumors.
Yeah, just,
That's it.
anything they deemed to be...
counter-revolutionary.
Yeah, or against the regime.
Wow.
And in that same article, they reported that they had executed over 500 hostages in Petrograd.
500?
Yeah, in just the preceding 4 days.
Wow.
So it shows you the scale of the reprisals that were already underway.
Yeah, so the announcement was really just a formality.
Kind of, yeah.
Because it had already begun.
Yeah, it was already happening.
So this was quickly followed by the formal decree.
Yes, the decree on Red Terror.
On Red Terror.
Yeah, very catchy.
Yeah.
And it was issued by the Council of People's Commissars on September 5th, 1918.
Okay.
And this decree formalized this policy of mass shooting.
Without hesitation.
Without hesitation. For anyone deemed to be involved in white guard organizations, conspiracies, rebellions.
Right.
And they also mandated that they publicize the names of those executed.
Okay.
And the reasons for the execution.
Wow, so they wanted to make this public.
Oh, yeah.
To inspire terror?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this wasn't just coming from the top?
No, it was...
There's a lot of people in the Bolshevik ranks.
Yeah.
Who were really pushing for this escalation.
Yeah, you had people like Grigory Petrovsky.
Okay.
He was a Soviet commissar.
Okay.
And he publicly called for an expansion of the terror.
Wow.
And an end to any looseness and tenderness.
Looseness and tenderness.
Yeah, he's basically saying, we need to be more ruthless.
Yeah. No more kid gloves.
Exactly, yeah.
So then we have this quote from Cheka commander.
Martin Latsis.
Martin Latsis, which is really...
Yeah, it's chill.
Really gets to the core of this.
So what did he say?
Well, in an article published in November 1918...
He basically said that the Red Terror was a class war.
Okay.
Aimed at the destruction of the bourgeoisie as a class.
Destruction of the bourgeoisie as a class.
That's right, yeah.
So it wasn't just eliminating individuals.
No, it was about eliminating an entire class of people.
Wow.
And he even instructed Cheka investigators not to seek evidence of specific actions against Soviet power.
Really?
Yeah. Instead, he told them to determine the fate of the accused. Based on their social origin, their education, occupation and their profession.
Wow, so it wasn't about what you did.
No,
It was about
it's about who you were.
who you were.
Yeah, he said, ask him what class he belongs to, what is his origin, what was his education, and what is his profession. These questions should determine the fate of the accused.
It's guilt by association.
Yeah, pretty much.
And class.
Yeah.
So it's a complete departure from any
Oh, absolutely.
kind of traditional legal principles.
It is, yeah.
So was everyone okay with this within the Bolsheviks?
Well, interestingly, even with this radical statement, Lenin actually criticized Latsis a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, not for the violence.
Okay.
But he did stress the importance of utilizing bourgeois specialists.
So even though he wanted to
destroy them.
eliminate them as a class, he still recognized that they needed some of them.
Yeah, he needed their expertise in areas like administration and economic reconstruction.
Yeah, I guess you can't just eliminate everyone with experience
Right, exactly.
and hope to run a country.
Yeah.
So when did this officially declared Red Terror end?
Well, officially, Gleb Boki,
Okay.
who was a leader in the Petrograd Cheka, he reported on October 15th, 1918,
Okay.
that the declared Red Terror in Petrograd was over.
In Petrograd?
In Petrograd, yeah.
But was that really the end of it?
Well, not really, no.
Okay.
It didn't mean that all political violence and repression stopped across Soviet Russia.
Right, because we know that there were a lot of other mass executions and terror campaigns that happened in other cities.
Yeah, in cities like Kharkov, Rostov-on-Don, Odessa, Kiev, Ekaterinodar, Armavir.
Okay, yeah.
They were occupied by the Bolsheviks at different points during the Civil War, and they had large numbers of prisoners.
Yeah.
Suspected counter-revolutionaries, hostages.
Executed. Yeah, and why? What was the reason?
Well, a lot of times it was just because they belonged to the possessing classes or they were associated with the white movement. And the numbers, in these individual cities, they often run into the thousands.
Thousands.
Yeah, over different periods.
Wow.
So it shows that they continued to use terror as a tool of control.
Right. And then you have the massacre in Crimea.
Yeah, in late 1920.
Right, after the defeat of the White Army.
Yeah, after General Wrangel's forces were defeated.
Okay.
Bela Kun and Rosalia Zemlyaczka, they oversaw this really brutal campaign.
Of what?
Of repression.
Okay.
Now, they had promised amnesty upon surrender, but it's estimated that something like 50,000 white prisoners of war.
50,000.
Yeah, and civilians,
wow,
who they thought were potential enemies, were executed.
So much for amnesty.
Yeah, right. And this is considered one of the largest single massacres of the whole Russian Civil War.
Are we sure about that number? 50,000?
Well, as with a lot of events from this period, the exact number is debated.
Okay.
Yeah, some eyewitness accounts and white emigre sources.
Okay.
They reported much higher figures.
Right.
But a report from the Crimean Cheka in 1921 suggested a lower number for those formally shot.
Formally shot.
Yeah, so modern historians, they estimate it to be somewhere between 5,000 and 12,000 for the total number executed in Crimea during this period.
Okay.
And Victor Serge, who is an anarchist who later joined the Bolsheviks, he actually acknowledged that the number of executed white officers was lower, but he condemned Kun's actions.
Really?
Yeah, he said it was treacherous and excessively cruel.
Wow, so even someone who was sympathetic to the Bolsheviks thought this was too far.
Yeah.
So there were differing opinions.
Oh, yeah. Host.